He moved my good scissors. That's what started it. Not a big thing, not a fight, not a harsh word, nothing like that. Marcus came by on a Sunday afternoon last October, and while I was in the back getting my sweater, he moved my good scissors from the drawer by the stove to the little cup on the counter. Said it made more sense there. Said he was just tidying up. My name is Annie Mae Carter. I'm 81 years old, and I stood in my own kitchen holding my sweater, and I thought, he doesn't know why I keep them in that drawer. He never asked. He just decided what made sense. I keep them there because that's where my mother kept hers. Because every morning when I open that drawer for a twist tie or a rubber band, I think of her hands for just a second. It's a small thing. It doesn't need explaining to anyone. But it's mine. That was it. That was the whole thing, right there. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Annie, that's nothing. That's just a son who loves you and wanted to help. And you'd be right. That's exactly right. Marcus has never been cruel to me, never been dismissive, never been ugly. People hear, my child ignores me, and they picture something dramatic. A door slammed, a phone call that never comes, a birthday forgotten. That's not Marcus. Marcus calls. He visits on holidays. He drove me to my cardiology appointment in February without me having to ask twice. He remembers to bring the good coffee when he comes, the kind I like. But those scissors, the way he moved them without asking, without wondering why they might be where they were, that was years of something right there in one small gesture. And I'm going to tell you how I handled it, and I'm going to be honest with you about the fact that I handled it wrong a few times before I finally got it right. After Earl passed, that was 9 years ago now, Marcus took on a kind of weight. He's the oldest. He's always been the one who shows up when things need doing. He fixed the gutters. He talked to the insurance people. He sat across from me at the kitchen table the week after the funeral and made a list on a yellow legal pad, and he worked through that list item by item over the following weeks. It helped me. I want to be fair about that. It genuinely helped me. I was in no shape to make phone calls. I could barely make coffee, but somewhere in there something shifted. Or maybe it had always been there and Earl's absence just made it visible. I became a thing on the list. Not mean, not on purpose, just that's how his mind works. Marcus has always been a solver. When he was 7 years old and his little sister fell off her bike and came in crying, he didn't put his arm around her. He went to the bathroom cabinet and got the Band-Aids. She wanted comfort. She got competent. She stopped crying eventually, so Marcus figured he'd done it right. Earl was the same way. That was the marriage I had for 43 years. Steady, reliable, emotionally somewhere else. When something upset me, Earl would fix the nearest broken thing. The screen door that squeaked. The car that needed an oil change. He meant well. He just didn't have the words. And after 43 years, I didn't have the expectation anymore. I'd made my peace with it. Or I thought I had. Maybe what I'd actually done was just lowered myself down until I fit inside the space he had available. I think I trained Marcus partly. I have to be honest about that. Every time Marcus would call and say, "How are you doing, Mama?" I would say, "I'm fine, sweetheart." Every time. Even when I wasn't. Even when I'd been up half the night with my hip, or when I'd cried that morning and couldn't entirely say why. I'd say I'm fine because I didn't want to be a burden. Didn't want to be the kind of mother her grown children dread calling. I knew women like that. I was not going to be one of them. My mother used to say, "You keep your troubles between yourself and the Lord," and I carried that all the way into my 80s like it was wisdom. It might have just been loneliness with a better name. I grew up in a house where my father, Cal, never raised his voice, never complained, never asked for anything from anyone. When I was upset as a girl, he'd put his hand on my shoulder and say, "You're all right." Just that. Not "What's the matter?" or "Tell me what happened." Just, "You're all right." And I believed him. I'd straighten up and get on with it. You were strong by being quiet. You were good by being easy to have around. I brought that model into my marriage. I brought it into my mothering. 6 children, and all of them grew up watching me smooth things over, make room, ask for less. They thought that was just who I was. I thought so too for a long time. So Marcus never learned to sit with me. because I never let him see that sitting was something I needed. Then one day last spring, I'm on the phone with him and I start to tell him about a dream I had, one of those strange, vivid ones that stay with you into the afternoon. I was describing this house I kept walking through, and my voice must have had something in it he didn't know what to do with. He interrupted me mid-sentence to ask if I'd taken my blood pressure medication. Not unkindly. He heard something, and he reached for the thing he could do something about. The dream went unfinished. I said yes, I'd taken my medication. We moved on to the grandkids. I hung up the phone and I sat for a while in the chair by the window. The one with the yellow cushion, the one that gets the afternoon light. And I thought, when is the last time Marcus asked me something and then waited for the full answer? I couldn't remember. And that scared me more than I expected it to. Not because Marcus was failing me in some dramatic way, but because I could see how it would keep going. Another 5 years, 10 years, however many I have. Me getting smaller and quieter and more manageable. Marcus never knowing the difference because I'd been making it easy for him my whole life. Something had to change. I just went about it wrong for a while first. I decided to be direct. Just tell him how I felt. That's what they say to do, isn't it? Have the honest conversation. Speak your truth. I've heard enough of that on television to fill a swimming pool. I waited for the next visit. He came in mid-June, a Saturday, and we had lunch. I'd made chicken salad, his favorite, with the celery cut small, the way he likes it. And afterward, while we were sitting on the porch with our sweet tea and the ceiling fan going and the heat coming up off the sidewalk the way it does in June in Georgia, I said, "Marcus, I want to talk to you about something." He sat up a little, set down his glass. I will say that about Marcus. When he thinks something serious is happening, he is present. He looked at me and said, "Sure, Mama. What's going on?" And I told him. I said I felt like lately we didn't really talk. That I used the word disconnected. I was proud of myself for that. Said I felt disconnected and that I missed knowing that he knew what was going on with me. Not just my health. Me. He listened. He was quiet, he was still, his eyes were on me the whole time. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment more, and I thought, this is it. This is the conversation. Then he said, "Mama, I think you might be lonely. Have you thought about that senior center over on Birchwood? Diane said they have a watercolor class on Tuesdays." I looked at him. He kept going. Said there was a church group nearby that did potlucks on the first Friday. Said he could drive me the first time. Said he'd read an article about how social activity was really important for cognitive health as you got older, that isolation could accelerate all kinds of things you didn't want accelerated. I sat there and I thought, I just told this man I miss him. I just told him I feel like I've disappeared from his life. And he is signing me up for watercolor class. I said, "That sounds fine, Marcus." And I drank my tea. He left that afternoon looking satisfied. Kissed my cheek, said he'd look up the Birchwood schedule. Drove off like a man who had handled something. I thought about how my generation raised our sons. We loved them fiercely, and then were surprised when they didn't know how to hold still. You reap what you sow, I suppose. We handed them hammers from the time they were small and then wondered why everything looked like a nail. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying I understand how it happened. I did not go to the watercolor class. I want to be clear about that. The next thing I tried, maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe the reaching was the problem. He's a busy man. 3 kids, a job that takes him halfway across the state. Maybe if I just eased back, stopped initiating, let things breathe, something would settle naturally. So for about 6 weeks, I stopped being the one to call first. I waited. Told myself it was healthy. Told myself this was what people meant by not being needy. Marcus called once that first week like usual. I was cheerful. Said everything was fine, keep him busy. He sounded relieved. Light even. I noticed that and filed it away. 3 more weeks went by. He called again. I was still fine. Still keeping busy. He said, "Mama, you sound good," like he was pleasantly surprised. That was the moment I understood what I'd actually done. He wasn't calling less because he didn't care. He was leaving me alone because he thought that was what I wanted. because I was so good at seeming fine. I had spent 60 years being good at seeming fine, and now that skill was working against me with the precision of something designed. The 6 weeks ended and nothing had shifted. If anything, there was more distance. Less contact, and the contact we did have even flatter than before. How are you? Fine. How are the grandkids? Good. How's the weather? Warm. All right then. Love you, mama. Love you, sweetheart. I started keeping myself busy in ways that had a tinge of desperation to them. Rearranging the linen closet, cooking big pots of things and freezing them in portions I'd never eat. Watching television with the sound turned up louder than necessary, just for the company of voices. I live alone in this house, and most days I genuinely like it. The quiet is mine, but there is a difference, a real physical difference, between chosen quiet and imposed quiet, between silence you walked into and silence you got left in. I was starting to feel the weight of the second kind pressing in. Then I made the third mistake. The worst one. I mentioned to Angela, she's my youngest, sharp as a tack, got her father's eyes and my mother's tongue. I mentioned I'd been feeling a little out of the loop with Marcus. Didn't say much more than that, just that something felt off between us. Angela loves hard, and she means every bit of it, but she has never in her life kept a piece of information to herself for more than 48 hours. Not since she was 9 and told the whole block about her brother's detention. I knew this about her. I told her anyway. I was just so tired of carrying it alone. Well, within the week, Marcus called. Not his usual Sunday evening call. A Wednesday, middle of the day. Different tone, measured, careful. He said, Mama, Angela mentioned you've been feeling like we're not connecting. Are you okay? Is something going on? The concern in his voice was real. It was genuine, not performance. He cared. But the way he said, are you okay? It was the same voice he'd use if I'd had a fall. Like he was already calculating what needed to be done. He came over the next Saturday, brought flowers, yellow tulips, which he knew I liked, and sat across from me at the kitchen table with that careful expression, the one that means he's braced for something difficult and is ready to be practical about it. He asked how I was feeling, asked if I needed anything done around the house. Asked if my neighbor had been checking on me. I said everything was fine, because what was I going to say? What I needed wasn't something you could pick up at the hardware store. What I needed was to not be looked at like something that might be failing, to not be approached with the careful, tender caution people use around things they're afraid might break. He stayed 2 hours, fixed a dripping faucet, cleaned out the gutters though they didn't need it yet. Called my pharmacy to confirm my insurance was still on file, standing at my kitchen counter with the phone to his ear, making sure everything was in order. He hugged me at the door, said to call if I needed anything, said he'd check in next week. I locked the door behind him and walked back to my yellow chair and sat down and felt more alone than I had in months. More alone than during the 6 weeks of silence. More alone than after the watercolor class conversation. Because this time he had been right here, 2 hours in my house, and he still hadn't known me. I was a set of needs to be assessed, a set of tasks to be completed. I was on the list and the list was done. The room got dim and I didn't get up to turn on a lamp for a while. Just sat there thinking about how a person could be surrounded by love and still feel like a stranger in her own life. It was a Thursday in October when everything finally moved. I wasn't prepared for it. I hadn't rehearsed anything. I think that matters. If I'd been ready, it would have come out wrong, too practiced, too much like a speech. It only worked because it wasn't one. He came by without calling first. I heard his truck pull into the driveway, and by the time I got to the door, he was already coming up the porch steps with a bag from the hardware store and that look he gets. Purposeful, forward-moving, already somewhere in his head past the hello. Said he'd been thinking about my kitchen cabinets on the drive over. Said the hinges on 2 of them were loose and he'd picked up the hardware to fix them. I let him in. I put on coffee. He got to work. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, and I watched him. Watched him go through my drawers, looking for a screwdriver, not asking which one I preferred, just opening drawers until he found it. watched him rearrange things on the counter to make room, put my mail into a stack that wasn't my system, picked up the little clay pot of basil and rosemary from the windowsill. I'd grown them from seed in the spring, watered them every morning, knew their particular lean toward the light, and set the pot on the floor because it was in his way. He was humming something under his breath. He was happy. He felt useful. He was taking care of his mother, and in his understanding of the world, that was exactly what a good son looked like. And I opened my mouth. The words were right there, ready. The words that smooth things over, that make room, that say, this is fine. Oh, you don't have to do all that. Just leave it, sweetheart. Any one of the 100 small, retreating phrases I have spent a lifetime keeping polished and close at hand. But they didn't come out. Something stopped. Something in my chest got very quiet, the way a room gets quiet before something important. I looked at my son crouched on the floor of my kitchen with a screwdriver in his hand, humming, moving my things, being good and useful and everywhere but with me. I thought about my father saying, "You're all right." I thought about Earl fixing the screen door. I thought about 60 years of making myself small and calling it strength. I said, "Marcus, stop for a minute. Not loud, not sharp. Just said it like I meant it." He looked up, screwdriver in hand. Surprised but not alarmed. I said, "I don't need the hinges fixed right now. Come sit down here with me." He set the screwdriver on the counter. He came to the table, sat down across from me, and I sat down too, and I looked at my oldest son, and I said, "I need you to just sit here for a few minutes and not try to fix anything." That was the whole thing. That was all of it. He looked at me. And then something happened in his face that I hadn't seen in a long time. Not sadness, not guilt, more like recognition. The way you look when someone says out loud the thing you already knew but had been moving too fast to face. His shoulders dropped about half an inch. He put his hands flat on the table. He said, "Okay," and we sat. I told him about the dream I'd never gotten to finish. The one from the spring. The house with the tall ceilings and the green wallpaper and the staircase that curved up to a landing where the light was different, brighter than it should have been, coming from no window I could see. I told him all of it slowly. He listened. He asked what the house looked like, and I told him. And he said it sounded like it might be my grandmother Cora's house, the one I described to him when he was a boy, sitting on this very porch. I said yes. I thought it probably was. He asked if I dreamed about her often. I said sometimes.
More lately.
He nodded. Then he said he still thought about his father a certain way, not dreaming, more like Earl would show up at the edge of his thoughts when he was working with his hands. I said that made sense. Earl was always most himself when he was doing something with his hands. Marcus laughed at that, a real laugh, surprised out of him. We sat at that table for almost an hour. The coffee went cold. He told me about something at work that had been sitting wrong with him, a decision he'd made that was still unresolved. He doesn't usually bring me the unfinished things. I think he always believed I needed things to be okay, that protecting me meant showing up with the settled version of himself. He talked and I listened, and I didn't try to fix it. I just let it be what it was. The October light came through the window over the sink and landed on the table between us. That low amber it gets in the late afternoon just before it drops. I noticed it the way you notice things when you're actually present somewhere instead of managing the moment from a careful distance. The hinges are still loose. I'm not in a hurry. He comes by on Thursdays now most weeks. Sometimes he brings his tools. When he does, I let him fix what genuinely needs fixing. When he starts moving towards something that doesn't, I'll say, "Marcus, come sit with me a minute," and he does. It took a few weeks for that to feel natural. Now it mostly does. There's a different quality to the air in the room when he's here. Less brisk, more like visiting. It isn't perfect. He still asks about my medication more than I'd like. Last month, he brought up one of those medical alert button systems, the kind you wear around your neck, and I could see the whole presentation he'd prepared. I said, "Marcus, I hear you." Just that. He nodded and we moved on. These things take time. You don't undo decades of pattern in a single afternoon at the kitchen table. But something shifted. Something real shifted, not dramatically, not like a door flying open, more like a window that had been painted shut for years, finally giving a little. Just enough for some air to get through. I want to say something about gratitude because I feel it and it's important to name it honestly. I am grateful for a son who showed up, who fixed the gutters and drove me to appointments and sat in waiting rooms reading magazines he had no interest in, who never once made me feel like a burden, even when the way he carried me made me feel unseen. He learned to love me in the language he had. I had a hand in building that language. I can't forget that. He called me last Tuesday in the middle of the afternoon while I was in the garden. He said, "Mama, I just saw a red-tailed hawk sitting on a fence post on the highway. Sat there still as anything while I drove past. I thought you'd want to know. I always loved hawks." I told him that once, years ago. He remembered. I stood there in my garden with the dirt on my knees and the sun going down behind the pine trees, and I said, "That's a good sign. Red-tailed hawk." He laughed and said he thought so too. We talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular. Then he had to go. I wrote it down in my little notebook when I came inside, the one I keep on the table by the yellow chair. October 21st, red-tailed hawk on the highway. Marcus called to tell me some things you want to keep. Thank you for sitting with me today. I mean that. It means more than you know. Take care of yourself, whatever that means to you.